in publicizing African literature, served as a prominent journalist and has done a lot in terms of propagating all sorts of ideas. He's a poet, an Egyptian poet, a novelist, a journalist, and his colleagues recently appointed him as the president of the Asia Journalists Association and in editor-in-chief of the prominent The Silk Road Literature. He's worked for over 3 decades as a cultural journalist and is extremely prolific. He has authored and translated over 42 books. Welcome to the program and thanks for joining us. Next is Monica, who is joining us from Zimbabwe, and she's the current Vice President of Pan-African Writers Association, the South African region. She serves on the board of the Zimbabwe International Book Fair Association, and she's an author of short story anthologies, very well respected, an academic, an author, and a very prominent public figure. Then we have the distinguished writer and administrator, currently managing a big institution in Gambia, Chanoma Barry, who is at the moment the current Vice Chancellor of the International Open University and President of the Writers Association of the Gambia. Please welcome to the program. And then we have our good friend, extremely talented, multi-talented Dr. Wale Okedere, a medical doctor, former member of the Nigerian Parliament, a publisher of 14 novels. He's won a number of literary prizes. One of his novels, Tenants of the House, is now a movie which you can see on Netflix. He established the first writers' residency in Nigeria, which is doing well. We cannot thank him enough. Let me start by first of all asking Dr. Wale Okedere just to tell the audience about PAWA, their activities, their current projects, and what PAWA envisage for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. And good day to all our participants and my fellow panelists. The Pan-African Writers Association is the umbrella body for all the national writers associations in Africa. And the headquarters is currently based in Accra, Ghana. And for the last 30 years, the association has been coordinating the activities of African writers all over the continent. This has been possible because of the vision of the association, which believes that literature can be a very important tool in the promotion of African culture. So what PAWA has been doing is to coordinate African literature in the 5 major languages. Some people call it colonial languages, English, French, Swahili, Arabic, and Portuguese. There's been a clamor of recent for us to also go into indigenous African languages. But we all know that this will be a very big task because of the multiplicity of African languages. So we coordinate African literature by organizing seminars, conferences. We institute literary prizes. We also assist in sponsoring literary events including residency programs and the like. Most recently, just like Professor Falola mentioned, we were all in Nigeria, specifically at the University of Ibadan, 60 years after the last Congregation of African Writers in Uganda. And we came together to look at the future of African literature, and we also look at what writers can do to use literature to support the fight against terrorism, insurgency on the continent. So I can say that by and large, we form ourselves into a literary think tank for Africa, and we hope that in the nearest future, we'll be able to do more because about 40 African countries were in Nigeria, and we believe that that congregation of writers is strong enough to push ahead with our agenda of using literature to promote African unity. Thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, and excuse my omission of Wanwigila Peter because I didn't see him in the video as I'm trying to check, but he's here with us, a very prominent writer, an activist. For his activism, his government sent him to prison, and from there, he wasn't discouraged, even was encouraging prisoners to write. He's a very prominent figure, and thanks for joining us. So thank you very much, Peter, and apologies for the earlier omission. I did not see you on the screen. The procedure for today, we're using Zoom to restream, and we're very grateful to those who have allowed us to restream to them in various countries. The second thing is that we've allowed the speakers to use a language they are most convenient with. So some will speak in Arabic, some in Swahili, some in French. That is part of our collective decision so that as a stream to these respective countries, the audience can follow. I will direct questions specific to each of them in relation to regional interests so as to broaden the discussion. One question will unite all of them, and that is for them to use 3 minutes each to talk about their work, their experiences, their current projects, and broad statements about literature in their own part of the world. Let me start with Chano Mabari. Please, 3 minutes on your work. Thank you. Please unmute him.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Toyin Falola. I'm honored to join you here on this discourse. Quickly, I have done most of my studies on comparative literature, and therefore have been more of a literary analyst and a critic instead of a writer. But I have been able to, in the process, discover much of African literature, and in a comparative nature also look at the northern and southern voices in my research. So let us say that that is part of my experience. Presently, I'm the Vice Chancellor of the International Open University and also the President of the Writers Association of the Gambia. And I have been one of those who have promoted Gambian literature beyond the shores. I have written several articles on African literature and Gambian literature in particular. I think I can stop there. The rest would be easy to find probably on research. Thank you very much, Prof.
This Monica Cheru. Monica Cheru.
Yes, thank you very much, Prof. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Monica Cheru. I'm from Zimbabwe, as Prof introduced me. I write short stories mostly, and my key interest is presenting Africa as just another place where people live, laugh, and love. I'm not a big fan of the bleak story of Africa, where it seems like everything is always sad, yet we really are the happiest people in the world. Like when you're down on the ground, in spite of whatever people may be going through. So I like to capture that happiness. Current project, I'm working on translating works by two famous Zimbabwean writers from Shona into English. Thank you.
Very much. Have I omitted anyone? Dr. Wale Okedira, you have to come back. Your work, please. What are you doing now? What are you writing?
Oh, okay. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Prof. I'm a novelist. I've had about 14 published books, many of which have won international and local literary awards. And I use my experience as a medical doctor mostly to write my stories. Apologies to my patients. I hope none of them will sue me for using them as guinea pigs. But I think that is one of the advantages of being a doctor and a writer. Those before me, Conan Doyle and the other Russian playwrights, Chekhov and co, has also alluded to using their experience as doctors to write. And this means that I write mostly about the social environment that I live in. And I was a member of the parliament in Nigeria for some years. This gave me some raw material to write about my book, Tenants of the House, which Professor Ayobanjo, who is in the audience today, helped me to review once. And he called it two novels in one. One romantic aspect, the other one about politics. And the book is now a movie on Netflix. I'm currently working on another factional book that is fact and fiction about the ongoing insurgency in Nigeria, about the Boko Haram issue. And the book is entitled Madagali. The Nigerian edition came out last year. And in September this year, the UK edition will be launched in the Oxford, UK. And between all this, I work as Secretary General of the Pan-African Writers Association, where I try to coordinate activities of writers on the continent. That is all. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, my great friend Ashraf Abdul. Your turn, 3 minutes, please.
How many people did it drop?
52.
Ashraf, please. Go ahead. You
Please
want
unmute yourself, please.
You have to unmute yourself at your end.
Yes. You give me the permission now, so I can start.
We can hear you now.
Yeah. You asked me about the language, and
ask about yourself.
Myself. Okay, yes. I will introduce what I am working now.
Yes.
Actually, I am interested currently in making anthologies for poets from all over the world. So currently, I am doing the 4th edition of the Silk Road Literature Anthology. The first one was for Asia Sings, The second one was Mediterranean Waves. The third is Ancient Egyptians, Modern Poets, and what I am publishing now is Arabian Nights and World Poems. And I think this kind of anthologies is a good space to collect creators of poems from all over the world, not only for one language, but more than one language. In the post, I am giving much of the time to journalism, cultural journalism, and from the other side, I am creating one of my new works in fiction. Actually, it is the fifth one, and it is somehow showcasing my travels to Korea, because the novels, 4 novels before I wrote, dealt with people who are going abroad or are living away from home, whether in the Gulf states or any other space of the world.
Thank you very much. And Mwawingila Peter, please, your work, what you're working on now, your interest. You can talk.
Hello everybody.
Hello.
Habari za jioni. Naitwa Mwamwingila Peter Goima. Ni Mtanzania kutoka Afrika Mashariki. Na sasa hivi ninashughulika hasa na kutangaza kitabu. Tuko katika kampeni maalum ya kufanya kitabu kipatikane kila sehemu. Na kampeni hiyo inaitwa Kitabu Kila Mahali, Kusoma Siachi Ng'o. Well, I'm saying currently I'm working on promoting a very good campaign that is known as Books Everywhere, I Won't Stop Reading. Na hii ni kampeni maalum kabisa kwa ajili ya kusaidia hasa watoto kurudisha ari ya usomaji, kwamba kitabu ni kitu ambacho hakikinzani na kitu chochote kile, kwa kinaweza kuwa sehemu yoyote, iwe ni hotelini, kwenye magari, kwenye mashule, na kila sehemu wapate taarifa na ufahamu. Well, I'm saying that the book Everywhere, I Won't Stop Reading is a promotion activity that encourage children to know and to understand that book is the only thing that associates with everything. It can be found anywhere, being in a hotel, in a transport, public transport, in the schools, and everywhere. Wherever you are, the book must be on your side as a weapon. Well, apart from that, I'm a member of Tanzania Literature Funds, that is Tanzania Fasihi Fund. It's an NGO that organizes funds for writers, especially little ones, children from schools, so that they can start writing their novels, their stories, their tales, and also they help until they publish books. Well, last year we managed to run an award competition and the later award, and from those who won the awards, 6 of them, 3 we made 1 book for them, and another 3, and so we made 2 books. They're here in my shelves, you can see them. Okay, so the pictures won't be so nice, but at least you can see it.
Yeah,
apart from that, I'm also running my own company. It's called Mtalimbo Books. It's specifically to incubate writers and to assist writers from the idea to publishing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me start with you. And the first question. So how do we engage African children to make them interested in African literature, considering all the various issues around the internet, the cell phone, and the virtual world? So I'm interested in saying you are promoting the reading of books, but how do we engage our children?
Well, thank you. It's a very good question, and actually a challenging one, because now the world has come together through technology. Now we can see a lot of things has been happening, and a lot of things has been challenging our societies, especially the African societies. Well, since the introduction of technology, you may find out that most adults has taken technology just as, when I say technology, I'm referring to information technology. So the use of internet, the smartphone, something like that. They've taken it as a tool for work. When he or she has a meeting, he can use a smartphone, texting and calling. When he returns at home, kids take that smartphone and use to explore a lot of things from different world. They think that even parents sometimes doesn't understand. So what I'm trying to tell is, we African children, our African children has been away from receiving our literary works from the others, because others are on the right side, the kids or the children are on the right side. Now, what we have to do is, we have several things to do, but the first one is we have to agree that now the literature has been from the books, from the physical stage to the technologies. Now it's we the adults to make sure that we are helping our children to understand when they use technology to explore other worlds, what should they explore? What should they be taking? Not to let them just explore everything. I can tell you something. When I get back home, the first thing that my kid will ask is a smartphone. Okay, fine. No password, no what. But after 5 minutes, she will be on the games. Okay. Now it's me to set permits on my gadgets so that he or she can download games. I'm not saying games are bad, but which games are they playing? Okay. Sometimes they're watching cartoons from other worlds. Now those cartoons are literal works. Now what messages do those one carry to our kids? It's we to make sure that we sit with our kids and tell them or show them the literature work of Africa so that we can induce them. When they can carry it, grow up with it, then it doesn't matter whether the world is a village or what. They will stand by the African literature.
Thank you. Monica Chero, a member wrote and said is confused, writing from Uganda. And he wants to know, what are the differences between writers and critics? Do please relate this to your own experience. What are the differences between writers and critics? Monica, please.
Yeah, she's disconnected.
Oh, sorry about that. While waiting for her, Omabari, can you share your perspectives on disruptive narratives in African literature? What some people call disruptive narratives. What do they mean?
Thank you very much. Yes, actually, in both academic and non-academic context today, there is a high level of interest in African literature. Some critics fear that many Africa's best-known authors are promoting a superficial, overly diasporic, or even Western-focused picture of the continent, rather than stories with solid roots in local African realities. Such debates, however, about African writing are likely to continue for a long time. Storytelling, we all know, is a powerful tool for bringing about change because of its ability to move and transcend pain, transform victimization into empowerment, and extinguish darkness. Narrative, when we say disruptive narrative, narrative is a term we use in system change advocacy when discussing concepts that shape people's actions. One story isn't enough to explain the current state of affairs. It has to be supplemented by various stories and images that either support or drive a movement for change. The general public is growing awareness of the power of these stories. Just to cite Aidan Muller, who said, and I quote, "Stories and narratives are what define us as humans. They provide the frameworks through which we view and understand the world," end of quote. And we also had Fumi Nketwa, who also said, I quote, "Narratives are about invisible power, how perceptions, belief systems, and ideologies shape the way people define what is right and what is wrong." So African literature is redefined by many writers today. Let's take, for instance, young writers emerging, women writers in particular, like Chimamanda Adichie, like Tedu Cole, Tai Selassie, Yagasi, and even Imbolombue, just but to name a few. Disruptive narratives are therefore present in emerging works of African writers that will create their canon with time.
Thank you. Please, whenever Monica is back, kindly let me know. Ashraf, let me return to the issue of language, which...
She's back.
Oh, she's back. Okay, Monica, there's a question for you. What is the difference between a writer and a critic? And can you relate this to your own personal experience?
Okay. I think a writer is the content producer, the one who actually puts a work together, whatever genre it may be. And the critic is the one who then analyzes the work and maybe unpacks it for the audience. Because as a writer, you are driven to just communicate, to put your thoughts, whether it's a poem, it's prose, it's a play, a script, whatever you're doing, you're just communicating your thoughts, what you're representing. The critic is the one who then puts it in context to say, possibly these are the themes. What is the actual plot? Who are the characters? Is it all working? Is it coming together? Is it a commentary on society? Is it futuristic? And maybe even deciding what genre is this? It's all the critics. I hope I've answered that one in full, Prof.
So there's a comment, and people have made this comment also with respect to artistry, that critics, because they can be employed in universities, are able to put food on their table. And writers sometimes are not able to put food on their table. So how do we balance the reward system between the critics and the writer?
My personal belief on that is that the poor writer in the Attic mentality is because writers don't approach their careers as professionals. If you look at it, you've got a skill as a writer. So if you intend to get paid from that skill, you then have to make a career path that leads you to be paid as a writer. For example, you've got people who sell their manuscripts. You've got people who do engagements based on what they write. And then you've also got commissioned works where when you've created a niche for yourself, you can be paid to produce certain things. So I really don't see the excuse for writers being poor or not being able to put food on the table. Let's have more professionalism in the career, in the industry. Right from the production, the first word you put, whether it's on a gadget or it's on actual paper or on a typewriter, up to the product itself, the distribution, where are you putting it? And how are you going to be paid for the time you've put in, for the skill, for the talent, everything?
Thank you. Let me go to Ashraf on the issue of language. What languages should we use for writing and publishing African modern literature? Ashraf, please.
Yes, actually, if we refer to the supremacy of a language, maybe 1,000 years ago, it could be Arabic, it could be Hausa or Swahili in Africa. But nowadays, the supremacy is going to English, French, Spanish on a global scale. And it may be after 30 years to other dominant language with it, Chinese or Russian, for example. In my opinion, the aim of choosing the language justifies its means to do so. If literature is directly locally for education, enlightenment, communication, entertainment, and creative expression, then there is nothing better than native languages to do all of this. If we want to choose from the available literature in local languages, what represents us before the world, let our evaluation be a choice of the best pieces of this literature to be transferred into a foreign language. And if you permit me, Dr. Waluk Jiran asked yesterday in the rehearsal if we could tell this in Arabic. So shortly, I will tell it in Arabic. لا يزال الجدل محتدما حول اللغة المختارة للأدب الإفريقي. ما هي اللغات المفضلة لكتابة ونشر الأدب الحديث؟ منذ 1000 سنة مضت كنا نتحدث عن القواعد عن تفوق اللغة العربية أو الهوسة أو السواحلية في إفريقيا. والآن يكون التفوق خيارا بين الإنجليزية والفرنسية والإسبانية على النطاق العالمي، وبعد 20 أو 30 عاما ربما تسود الصينية أو الروسية. لذا أرى أن الهدف من اختيار اللغة يبرر الوسيلة للقيام بذلك، فإذا كان الأدب موجها محليا للتعليم والتنوير والاتصال والترفيه والتعبير الإبداعي، فلا يوجد شيء أفضل من اللغات الأصلية للقيام بذلك. ولكننا إذا أردنا أن نختار من هذه الأدبيات المتوفرة باللغات المحلية ما يمثلنا أمام العالم، فلندع تقييمنا يكون اختيارا لأفضل القطع الأدبية لترجمتها للغة السائدة. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Okedira, please follow up on translation. It's just spoken in Arabic. Should we translate? Should we engage in translation from Swahili?
Thank you, Prof.
Yoruba, and if so, how do we do this? And what should be the focus?
Yes. Thank you, Prof. The issue of translation is at the heart of our work in PAWA, because as you can see, we work in different languages, and there's an urgent need for us to exchange literature across borders. For example, you have a country like Ghana that is surrounded by Francophone countries. Togo is there, Ivory Coast is there, and each time I travel to Lomé from Accra, the moment I cross the border, I'm a bit lost because I have to start looking for how to speak in French. And now you want writers to communicate among themselves, to exchange books, and that is where translation is a very important issue for us. Again, some school of thought has said, look, why don't we just forget translation and adopt a common language in Africa? Can we adopt Swahili, or can we try Arabic, or is it Hausa? And then you will see that you run into problems again because of the multiplicity of languages in Africa. In Nigeria alone, we have more than 560 ethnic groups speaking their own languages, and I don't know how you want to come to terms with using one language. And so for us in the Pan-African Writers Association, we have set up a bureau which is based in Cairo, Egypt. And the idea is for us to see how many books we can translate from one language to the other. You agree with me that this is a Herculean task because it's expensive to translate. You have to pay translators. You have to also have to pay publishers to produce these books. But we are lucky because we have some of our members who are volunteers, who are acting as volunteers to translate their works. And this is what we are doing now. This does not mean that we still don't need support. We're reaching out to so many foundations that are involved with translation. And I'm lucky, and we are lucky that we have one or two of them that are agencies under the African Union. And this is something that we are pursuing now. In the next few weeks, we're going to have a workshop here in Ghana, specifically on translation. And the idea is to train trainers. It's going to be a workshop of training of trainers. We want to have a large body of translators that will help us. Because we had this challenge in Ibadan during our conference, trying to switch from French to English to Arabic during the conference, and people like Professor Falola and co were getting weary that the conference was becoming a bit too verbose. But we cannot run away from translation, and it's still something that we need help. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Monica, because I'm always worried about your internet. Suppose you and the other members of the panel, suppose you did not win any major prize. What does this mean for your work and for literature and for those that we're encouraging to write? Should we be prize obsessed?
No, definitely not. I'm actually an advocate against the awards, the prizes. I'm not going to go into specific ones for fear of offending some of my colleagues here, because it's a matter of principle, nothing personal. You look at some of these awards, there's a frame that they have. You have to write in a certain way in order to qualify for those awards. And unfortunately, at international level, they tend to favor the negative story of Africa. And yes, we have a few writers who make money out of this. But at the end of the day, what percentage of the African writers are they in any given year? How many people get these prizes? So I don't think we should write for that. And I don't think we should encourage the young people who are coming into writing to aim for the prizes. It is also my belief that if a writer meets the needs of the audience, they should be able to be successful as a writer just by producing the products that your audiences want to consume. Back to you, Prof.
What's your view on defining African literature from a gender perspective?
Again, another area that I'm not a big fan of. because maybe the works that have been produced that that define the gender perspective in African literature tend to be sponsored. And when you read them, their entertainment value, their creativity is rather low because they are trying to portray a certain something. They are more about the issue rather than the natural flow of writing. So, and also they tend to feed into this single narrative of the evil traditional African culture against females. Yet when you really look at us as we live our lives, these issues are complicated and we should be able to just allow them to come out naturally in the different perspectives so that we can actually have informed debates and discussions about these things. Because the African traditions, when you go into it, there are a lot of beautiful customs that actually empower women. But because the narrative has been African traditional religion is negative to the female, that's what the literature tends to portray. I'll give you one example. In Uganda, there's an ethnic group where a woman can only be married once from her mother's kitchen. So the men, when they come, they are subdued, they submit, and they clap hands and they practically crawl to get this woman. Now this woman is empowered because she can only be married from her mother's heart once. If she then divorces this man and has to marry another guy, this ex-husband has to get her married from his home. And obviously no man wants to do that. So we are saying these are things we can be talking about in the female gender equality equation, but they're missing from our literature because we are paid to write that African tradition is negative to women.
Thank you. Omabari, would you want to respond to her in terms of the gender perspective and in terms of the award system? Should Gambia not institute its own award and pay attention to your best minds?
Well, I guess probably the issue of an award should also be seen from a different angle, more from the angle of motivation, encouragement, and not more from the monetary or just the merit perspective. Awards normally encourages young writers and gives them the hope that, you know, writing also has a way of being recognized, because recognition is very important. And unfortunately, we have a way of poorly recognizing our own. We have got great writers, some of whom are probably under the shadows. And if you give awards, you tend to bring them under the lights, under the spotlight, so that people get to know them, get to be encouraged to read their books. People hardly read, you know. We all agree now that the reading culture is dying all over Africa and all over the world. People are not so hooked up to technology now, they hardly read books. But what we are saying is, if you create awards, what it brings to light is, look, this particular person have written some substantial issue. He might not be the best in the matter, he might not be the expert in the area, but he has contributed somehow, and giving him the awards gives him a kind of a recognition and brings him to the spotlight. And what happens, therefore, is that people will be curious to know what he has written, and will want to buy his books and read about his stories, etc., etc. But, you know, in the last 2 decades, you know, many literary critics have witnessed also female writers take the pen to put ink on paper about the experiences in these very complex African societies. You've heard my sister just mention, Monica, that, you know, we try to probably question our cultures, question our religion, how they depict the woman or how they treat the woman. But we also want to hear from the woman. Sometimes all these things are coming from the perspective of the man. But strong voices have been echoed on controversial thematic issues, and women's symbolic protest through the pen has evolved. So it would be insulting to depict women as anything other than strong partners in all spheres of our struggles for autonomy, economic independence, and change. So I agree with Monica to some extent, yes. The woman should not also be seen to be just an object within a complex society of of the African cultures, practices, and all that. But she has now, I think, given herself the opportunity to take her own proper place within society, to be able to say what she wants to say. Yes, she has a right to fight her fight too. You know, there are certain fights, she's fighting them too. And I think we need to listen to those voices. So those are the silent voices that would come emerging, and I think eventually give them a platform so that we now can take into consideration these emerging difficult, complex issues in our African context.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Any of you can respond at any time you choose like. Peter, social media. What is the impact of social media? Some people have argued that today it's so powerful, and some people are saying the mode of publishing in paper, hard copies may become anachronistic with time, and publishing on the internet and the use of social media may become more common. What's your view on this, please?
Thank you, Professor. First of all, I have a little different view about that. That social media has become more popular than the paperback. For example, here in Tanzania, you are one of my witnesses. You have tried to reach me during the previous week, and I was in a remote area. I could not even send you a WhatsApp message. So we still have a vacant. We still have an unsaturated market for these papers. We still have that one. First of all, these are internet bundles and everything. They're so expensive. They're so expensive. If you just move out from Dar es Salaam to districts in the remote area of Tanzania, I'm telling you, we still suffer with the internet. But the major issue is, what are we taking as a gift to our children nowadays? You've gone to safari, you came back with a smartphone. Now, what do you expect your children to use? Will it be a book? It's definitely a smartphone. I happened to had a guest a month ago. He's a publisher from our neighbor country, Kenya. And he told me, see, we don't have market for books. And I asked him, since when you entered Tanzania, tell me, what billboards have you seen on the roads? What advertisement have you seen? He said, sorry to mention, but it's a reality. So the Coca-Cola, so the Pepsi, so the Vodacom, the Tigo, something like that. Then I asked him, you have stayed before the TV session. Did you ever come across any advert that's publicizing a book? He said, no. He said, no. Then if you don't spend 30% or 40% of your income to markets, will it be a product to be sold? We are putting blames on the social medias and everything. But the thing is, we don't want to invest on books. Even physical books, leave apart the online, the soft copies. So we should not shift the blame from our mistakes to some other side. Please allow me to speak a little in Kiswahili so that other people could also understand. They are my followers. Ninachosema ni kwamba tunapoweka malawama katika mitandao ya kijamii kwamba imeshika kasi kuliko vitabu, sio kweli. Sisi ndio tunaosaidia hilo, lakini ukweli ni kwamba hakuna mwekezaji ambaye anatumia nguvu zake, hela zake katika kuhakikisha kitabu kinawafikia watoto. Nimefanya tafiti yangu ndogo mkoani Mtwara. Kila mzazi aliyenunua kitabu amepiga simu tena akitaka kitabu kingine, kwa sababu vitabu vile vilifika nyumbani, na wanasema ukweli ni kwamba hawapati vitabu. Well, I was trying to add there, that is, I've done a very simple survey in one of our regions here. It's called Mtwara, the south of Tanzania. Every parent that happened to purchase my storybook for his child, he definitely came back asking for another version for a continuation of the book. And they really agreed that we haven't been sending home gifts like books. We've been sending home chocolates and there's something like that, drinks, something like that. So if we take our time, invest in our kids, that we should read. For example, in the night, you read a book with your son or with your daughter, automatically tomorrow she will ask for a continuation.
Thank you.
That is my take.
Monica, you want to respond, but I will add my question. So if you go to many hotels in Africa, the airports, and I've been privileged to travel a lot, you don't see books written by Africans in many of these hotels and the airports. So you see books written by other people, making Obama, how to become successful, religious books. So why is that? And how can we correct that? What are the consequences of that kind of behavior? Thank you.
I think your question actually fits into the response that I wanted to give to my colleague there. We need to move with the times and understand what the audiences are consuming. For example, the inspirational writing is something that is really big the world over, including in Africa. But because as writers, we have certain spaces that we have defined for ourselves. And African literature must be very serious. It must come almost like in essay form. It must go into, political issues, deep issues, and it must address them in a very grave manner. That's how you become a serious writer. That the critics will be wanting to talk about. You define Africa. Now, our people are not reading that. So this is why you find that Joyce Meyer, the American whatever evangelist, sells more books in Africa than African writers. It's because she's speaking to the issues that people want to engage on. Even if you then follow the social media behavior, what is it that people are consuming? They are not consuming the serious issues. Even when you've got countries that are going into elections, you find that the serious issues are reduced to jokes. So as writers, we have to identify what are the spaces that we need to fill. What is the story that people want to read? And ultimately, what is the story that we want to tell? And find a common platform for all that. Now, coming back to your earlier issue about writers not being able to make money from their careers, I want to bet every country has got some famous people doing skits, comedies, that sort of thing on social media, and they have the largest number of followers. So as writers, why are we not creating a professional space where we are the ones who do the scripts, not just any random person? So there's a difference between a professionally done.
Dr. Kedra, let me turn to you. So, and it's a follow-up on the last question. If you just using the airport, when next you travel, pay attention to the books that passengers and your co-travelers are carrying before you enter the plane. more carrying the Bible than, say, your work or that of Shoyinka or Shafisa. Why is that? And how can we say, okay, we are not asking you not to read your Bible, but why don't you read a novel or a poem?
Thank you, Prof. We are moving into a very sensitive area because religion, they say, is the opium of the people. And I know that if you want to compare your popularity, the popularity of a novelist with that of an evangelist, you will be on the losing side because nobody wants to listen to you. But if you promise them heaven and prosperity and everything, you can be sure that you will see people running after you. I think we need just to strike a balance because, as we all know, Africans are very religious. Although some critics will say that it does not transmit into anything positive. I don't want to agree. But the point is that, just like Monica said, we need to take advantage of some of the things that we see around us that are popular. Is there anything we can borrow from the televangelists? Is there anything we can borrow from the online marketers and people who use the social media to propagate their skill or even or spread their rumors? Because as you all know, there's a lot of rumor mongering now going on social media. And what are the emotional things that make people to believe more in social media than even the factual textbooks? I'm also an advocate of writers using their literature to make money. I'm not going to say commercialization of literature, but at the same time, for them to be able to break even, put food on their table, as has been said. And that is why I believe that we can still, even though the social media has its negatives, it has its drawbacks, we can still tap into it to advance literature. This came to fore during the pandemic, the height of the COVID pandemic, when many of us could not attend the book fairs, we could not go out and could not go to libraries, and we had to go to the social media for help. Here in Accra, many of our activities were done online for close to 1.5 years. And that was the first time I started learning new things on how to use, to organize seminars, conferences, even to organize book fairs online. And I think this is where we should look into. We've also looked into the area of using our literature to get into the commercial sector. For example, film adaptations. We have watched some of our, in Nigeria, Nollywood. So one of the drawbacks of the Nollywood industry is that the scripts are badly written. Whereas we have a gamut of beautiful, award-winning novels that can be adapted into film. I did this with my book, Tenants of the House, even though I'm still paying the loan. I'm here to break even, but I still believe that this is something we can still explore. Let's go into, let's utilize literature in other forms so that we can make it to be more popular. And then the issue of having to use apps and co in literacy. Now there is a popular news magazine, The Continent. I think it's been published in Kenya. That is circulated by the social media. I think it's WhatsApp or Instagram, and this is highly successful. So this is something we can also tap into. I can understand what Peter is saying, that in Tanzania, it's not only in Tanzania, many African countries, to accessing social media can be expensive. Firstly, you have to buy the airtime, you have to charge your phones. Some of us go about with power banks because your phone will go off because of poor electricity supply. So we have all those challenges. But having said that, I still think it's something we need to embrace is the new normal in writing now. Publishing is becoming digital, and we have to follow these routes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chano. Omar, with your role as a vice chancellor.
Channel should speak some French to us, please, sir.
Yes.
We want to hear him speak French.
Okay.
So, will it be a bad idea to say madrasas and mosques? Can you include reading literary works that are not opposed to Islam? Can we not use that kind of space?
Okay, maybe I will just give a little bit of the French aspect of it, then come back to English. En fait, pour le contexte de la littérature non islamique dans l'espace plutôt islamisé, moi je pense que ce n'est pas quelque chose qui est impossible. Parce que la littérature pourrait donner des narrations assez ouvertes et assez diverses. Disons par exemple, les sujets qui sont exploités dans la littérature en général pourraient aussi être des sujets qui sont plutôt contemporains, qui sont sociaux, qui sont des sujets de vie. Donc, à mon avis, ce ne sont pas des sujets qui sont impossibles à inclure dans des institutions islamiques, dans des madrasas, par exemple, comme littérature à lire ou à apprendre. Peut-être ce qui est plutôt des questions de prudence dans cet espace très islamisé, c'est peut-être des sujets qui pourraient avoir des influences dans la pensée et dans la pratique de ces personnes en ce qui concerne les choses qui sont tabous dans leur religion. Mais si le sujet est abordé en perspective, disons, peut-être une littérature serait bien inclus et reconnu dans cet espace. Donc, as I was saying, you mentioned about this type of literature that is probably non-Islamic, but within the context of an Islamic institute, like a madrasa. I was just saying that literature is so diverse and has so many themes that, you know, a lot of non-Islamic literature can still be accepted within the madrasa and or the Islamic context. The questions maybe that will arise is if the literature is trying to promote something that you know, from the perspective of religion is seen to be something that cannot be promoted within that context. So in that case, then that kind of literature would definitely be pushed aside. However, you know, you can have literature like Things Fall Apart, that is talking about a society that has been living, you know, in an anemic, you know, without believing in the kind of gods, let's say the African gods, believing the African gods, and not maybe the God of Christianity or the God of Islam, but the African gods, and yet in confrontation with Christianity. That kind of a book is a kind of a literature, it's a kind of a, if you want to consider it historic fiction, you know, that can be accepted within that society for people to understand what was the type of people that, what are the type of people that have been living during that time, and that is the reality. So, so literature has that kind of general theme that can be accepted. As I said, it's only when the literature is trying desperately to promote, and here I'm talking of really emphasize on society accepting a certain kinds of practices that the religion would find a little too difficult to accept. In that case, yes, that could be vetted and then maybe not included at all as part of literature that would be allowed in the case of the madrasa. But please allow me just one or two things to also add. You know, we've been talking about books that are missing within the airports or in hotels. You know, we've been advocating for it as an association. In fact, even here, we have been saying that every tourist that comes through a kind of tourism package, naturally, they should have a book or two written by a Gambian, you know, or an African included in their you know, small box or small bag that they can carry along, so that they, when they go to the beach, when they're taking some little bit of sun, they want to read something, they can take out one of our Gambian books and read. I have been desperately trying to write some of the books, review some of the books, Gambian books and African books on the newspapers. and it has to, generate a lot of interest among the tourists. Some of them have been calling me, asking me where they can get the book. So it shows, therefore, that there is an interest sometimes in reading books written by, in countries where people visit, so that they can discover their cultures, discover the people, etc. But we are not promoting it. So here, I might have to task my brother, Dr. Wale, being the Secretary General of PAWA, probably to start pushing this agenda across the associations, maybe encourage associations, with PAWA's influence, to see that books are put in airports. You see, I buy books when I go to most airports. This book, for example, I bought it in Rwanda, in Kigali, when I was leaving. It's called Modern Speeches, and this is Barack Obama, and the hundreds of other speeches are here. So these are books you find, but you cannot find much of African books. You can find maybe Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, some of the classics of African literature, but you don't find the contemporary ones, and you find it difficult really to access them. So maybe we should make an effort to see that some of these books are available, and probably the booksellers would find it easy to have them on their shelves to promote our African literature. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashraf. I'm back to the issue of languages. So you are a translator, and as Dr. Okedron said, translation is very important. How successful has been the experience of translating Arabic literature in Africa into European languages? Has it been successful?
Yes, actually, it was not that success expected after maybe 7 or 8 decades of translating modern Arabic literature. I'm talking about Arabic literature in North Africa, whether it is Francophone for Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, or it is Anglophone from Egypt, for example, and Sudan, of course. So Arabic language translation of its novels or its literature witnessed a turning point. This turning point came when Naguib Mahfouz won a Nobel Prize in Literature 2 years after Wordswinka. That was 1988. And later in the 21st century, we witnessed another shift after September 11 and Arab Spring, because the West wanted to know what is written in literature for those who speak Arabic. But actually, from my point of view, these translations into European language are very limited. They are very, they don't have that spread. We know when someone from Europe or Latin America translated into Arabic, everyone who speaks Arabic knows about him. But if you go to Europe asking about any novelist away from Naguib Mahfouz or some few others who are only important because of their political, political situation against their regimes, you will find no one of common readers know about Arabic literature, especially novels. So let us say, let us be clear that translation of Arabic literature, especially modern literature in North Africa, didn't go far beyond the these limit or narrow alleys of academic rooms and few critics in newspapers. That's all. Let me say this briefly in Arabic, please. كان فوز نجيب محفوظ بجائزة نوبل في 88 نقطة تحول كبرى للاهتمام بالأدب العربي بشكل عام والرواية العربية على نحو خاص. وإذا كنا نفرق بين المشرق والمغرب العربيين في تناول المنتج الأدبي، فإن الفرنكوفونية ساهمت في ترجمة الأدب العربي في غرب الشمال الأفريقي، وكانت الترجمة إلى اللغات الأوروبية ملحقة بالإرث الاستعماري ولغتي. خارطة الأدب حينما حدث 11 سبتمبر وبعد ذلك الربيع العربي، رأينا نقلة أخرى واهتماما أكبر، ولكن ظل هذا الاهتمام أسيرا للأكاديمية وفقط في حدود ضيقة. وللأسف الشديد لا نقول أن الأدب العربي ترجم ليقرأه العامة وإنما ظل حبيس للنقد والأكاديميات. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Kedra, so in view of some of these challenges, Ashraf just told us about the limited impact of that translation. Should we put technology to greater use? Can technology rescue some of these challenges for us?
Yes, Prof. I believe technology can do a lot of things for us, but as we all know, technology is not perfect. It also has its drawbacks. People are now saying that the incursion of the technology into our living rooms in the form of DSTV and all these other things has even worsened the reading culture. People believe that now our young men, well, not young men, most even men and women are now more interested in the Premiership, the Premier soccer in the UK than their geography textbooks and all these things. And they can give you the names of 10 top football coaches in the UK, but they can't tell you the name of the president of their country. And so many distractions that we believe that technology has brought into the lives of our young ones. And I believe that is why I understand what Peter was trying to say. And of course, Monica is a strong advocate of technology in literature, I think because of our work in digital publishing. So we need to strike a balance. That's my own position. Because if we depend too much on technology, we're going to lose so many things. We're going to lose the storytelling tradition that our forefathers gave to us. Africans, by nature, as we all know, were oralists in the first instance. We depend more on oral literature than the written form. And from this, we're able to pass down the generations, ballads, jala, and our so many rich cultural things, which unfortunately have been lost to technology. People will say, well, why can't we tap into it? Why can't we use technology to improve literature? I've mentioned somebody who now circulates his weekly newspaper by WhatsApp. People will also say, why don't you use modern technology to take books to the rural areas? I know that I think in Nigeria, the Lagos State, for example, the Minister of Education at the time was using the radio to give lessons to students during the lockdown, during the pandemic. Battery-operated small radios were distributed to rural areas, and story lectures were now given through radio to these areas. So I think the issue is to strike a balance, but I don't think technology is the almighty, so to say, almighty savior that we are expecting because of its own limitations. Yes, thank you. Prof, we lost Prof.
Why has it been very difficult to create a movement around some of what we think is important, whether it's Yoruba studies or poetry? Some people have argued that there is no movement that sustains them. And by movement, they mean large-scale mobilization on some of the projects we believe. Is it a function of the language we use, or is it a function of not connecting that literature to some other purposes? Can PAWA become a movement rather than an organization?
Yes, we are trying to become a movement, in quotes, not the kind of movement that has pushed some of our evangelists to the popular era, but we believe that a way of inculcating the literary culture into our people is to go back to our roots and also to invest in the young ones. I'm happy with what Peter is doing in Tanzania. I've had to collaborate with him, and PAWA is currently collaborating with I don't know how to call them unions or book clubs. We have a plethora of book clubs now springing up all over Africa. I know in Nigeria, Wale, a young writer, is busy all over the place, creating book clubs in every city in Nigeria. And the same thing is happening here in Ghana. We have various book clubs, and these are for us, these are the kind of engine room for movements, going to the grassroots. And recently, an association of book clubs of Nigeria was formed, and we assisted this association to also metamorphose into association of African book clubs. We are now using these book clubs to reach secondary schools, primary schools, to reach the unreached, so to say. And that is, I believe, the beginning of a movement. Because if we continue to make literature elitist, we want to just domicile it only in the universities, among the dons, among the elderly ones, we will not succeed. We need to invest in the young ones. We need to invest, and even though Monica doesn't like the issue of gender being used to make some point, we need to invest in women writers. Because in the last few times I tried to, we have this, what we call in PAWA Book of the Week. Each time we sit down to pick a book for the week, and we look at some of the criteria we are using. Usually fall on female writers. Maybe the female writers will take over from the male writers if we are not careful. But we still need to invest in the female writers. We need to invest in the young writers. And I'm happy that book clubs, we have discovered that book. And then again, let me mention the SDG intervention, Sustainable Development Goals, which we all know is a UN creation of using tackling development on the continent. We, PAWA and some other organizations came together to look at the promotion of books in the area of SDGs, books for our children. We discovered that we don't have books written by African authors. Most of the books written in these SDGs, water, clean environment, sanitation, and all these things are by Western writers. So we needed to fill that gap. If not, they will, Western writers will flood our market again with books that our children will not understand. So we've been able to do that, even though we still have a long way to go. We'll be able to create, organize workshops so that we now have writers who now write in the SDG themes. And through that, we are reaching the grassroots, we are reaching our school children. But I want to say that book clubs should be encouraged. The formation of book clubs should be encouraged. We discovered that book clubs will help us to turn literature and reading and writing into a movement, just like Professor Falola is trying to suggest. Maybe we'll make Professor Falola the grand patron of this movement. We can give it a name, Tony Falola Movement of Africa.
Thank you. Chano, let me turn to you. Issues around the function of literature. So are you there? So why are people criticizing writers as if they're bureaucrats and politicians and policymakers? Neo Shundari can write a good poem, but why should we say he should solve the problem of poor governance, or Oshofisa can write a good play? Is it his role to say, this is how I want to prevent military takeover? Or should I criticize you for not stopping Gambians from crossing the Sahara Desert and killing themselves in the process? Or should I say, Oleshoyinka won the Nobel Prize, but it doesn't have an answer to the issue of high debts in Africa. Nigeria is broke now. So how come his Nobel cannot prevent that? So there's this functionality issues in which African writers have been heavily criticized, sometimes saying, what is the policy contents of their work? First of all, what's your view? Is it their role, or are they being misunderstood by the public?
Okay, so maybe I will start in French and then come back to English. I'll make it brief in French. Tout d'abord, il faudra comprendre que la littérature, avant tout, a été nommée les belles lettres. Donc, les belles lettres veut dire donc écrire passionnément avec un ton ou avec un style assez beau, assez joli à lire et à apprécier. Tout donc rester dans la maîtrise de la langue d'abord et dans la construction de ces idées avec des mots qui pourraient donc résonner avec rythme, avec musique si vous voulez. Donc la littérature d'abord commençait comme ça, avec cette idée de belles lettres. Mais avec le temps, nous avons constaté que nous avons utilisé la littérature comme véhicule pour transmettre nos frustrations, pour parler, pour même transmettre le message de gens qui n'ont pas de voix, qui n'ont pas la possibilité de parler. Donc voilà pourquoi la littérature, donc avec le temps, a eu une autre identité. Mais nous savons que dans l'histoire, tout d'abord, la littérature, comme Shakespeare par exemple, utilisait la littérature d'une manière très artistique sur scène, ce qui faisait apprécier le langage qui a été utilisé. Quand on parle de Voltaire, quand on parle des grands écrivains français ou anglais, ce qu'on retient toujours, c'est la manière dont ils ont tissé la langue d'une manière très artistique, d'une manière très jolie pour l'appréciation du lecteur. Oui, mais aujourd'hui, bien sûr, pour l'Afrique, par exemple, maintenant, c'est plutôt utilisé comme un outil des plaintes, un outil pour combattre un peu les fléaux qui se trouvent en Afrique. As I was saying, I understand the position that you put literature in, but historically, if you go back in classic times, literature has always been used as what we call a vehicle of the beautiful language, as it was called in French, belle lettre. It is more of beauty, of aesthetic nature, of the way of transmitting a message in a more beautiful way. Literature has been like that. And I just cited Shakespeare. You know, what makes Shakespeare good was the fact that he could use language on scene, on stage, in such a beautiful way that you can appreciate the message being given. It's like as if you are listening to an opera song. You know, the beauty of the whole song is not only the music, it's also about the lyrics, about how the singer is able to transform language in such an artistic way and then, you know, convey it. So literature has been like that all along. Yes, but Africa has also restructured its own literature to be a way of vehiculing or transmitting the voice of people, of those who might wish to speak, but they cannot have the opportunity to speak. Because you see, the people you speak to need to understand what you're saying. And we know through our oral traditions that the person who speaks is given a particular duty, a particular responsibility of conveying the frustration of the people to the king, of conveying the pains, the joys, but also the happiness and the beauty of what literature is all about to the king or to the public. So we have that oral, that griot, you know, who speaks with some background song. But then at the same time, our literature has always been therefore transmitted or transformed in that manner, to be able to convey, to be able to speak out. So these southern voices have changed the narratives to echo the cries of the downtrodden and speak for the voiceless on these matters. And Africa continues to experience such a difficult and critical transition You did mention, some of the issues: poor governance, extreme poverty, coup d'etats, endemic corruption, pillage of its resources, senseless violence. So this is what it's been experienced. And who is going to speak against it? The journalist has a role to play, but the writer has a much bigger role to play. He has the posterity on him. He has a way of ensuring that it's not only spoken about, but it's also documented. They have the right to they have to put the pressure, on the contemporary governments, to tell them, look, we as a people need some change. They are the ones who should drive that change. So they see themselves in the role, the writer. And as a result, then there is this, the critic. You mentioned the critic. Why are the critics probably not very happy with what the writers write, or try to box them into a kind of a theme? But even there, we still have these two parallel literature going on. There is the literature that is still extolling the beauty of African culture. And that is where you have Monica trying to say, we don't have to always forget that part of our literature. But there's also that part of the literature that says, okay, you know what? We are the voice of the silent voices. We are the voice of the voiceless. We are those who also convey the frustration, the pain of what people feel that is not being said in a much bigger platform. We want others to be exposed to it so that they get to know. So African writers might not need to have the answers to the issues, but they have the voice they can amplify to serve as a pressure group, to make governments, reluctant as they might be, to relent and begin to see reason and act accordingly. So African writers have the power of the mighty pen to put to paper anything they figure needs sharing to the present generation, or to make the continent, so as to make the continent a better place. I hope I've put it rightly.
Yes,
Prof.
yes, you put it brilliantly. So Monica, what do you think about his answer? So when we switch to, say, music, where we can also pose a similar question on functions, the young people like Davido and Savage and Gold and all of them, they are speaking to aspirational issues, money and love. And the two most popular music emerged out of Africa became global, far more than any book, far more than all the book of all African writers could ever imagine in terms of sales. Jerusalem and Bugalulu. Those so I listen to all this music. It's just about mobility and aspiration. Beautiful women, spending money on women. So if it works, can it not work for literature?
I think it has already worked for literature in a certain way, if we change the boundaries of what we define as literature. Look at Nollywood films, which start with a script. And I think we've agreed that some of the scripts are not the best. But what do they offer? Escapism. They offer us hope. They talk to our aspirations of money, of love. So it's just about the definition. As writers, such as the people in power, do we want to remain in a small box where we say we are the serious ones? We are not going to talk about these issues. Because if you look at music, it's a mixed sport. You've got music that is protest music, and it tends to also get popular, like a song comes on board and people pick it up for that time. You have music that is about love, like you're saying, and the rich young men. But you also have music that is taking us back to our traditional identity. And it all finds audiences and people get on board for a while. So I think literature can definitely learn from music. And again, the same accusations that writers are facing, that they are not serious about issues. In Zimbabwe, we've had one of our biggest musicians, people trying to put a cancel culture on social media because they did not like that he kept quiet on some issue that they wanted celebrities to talk about, which was political. So it's all there. But I definitely agree that we just need to have space where anyone can speak their minds about what they like and not prescribe to say, as writers, it's your job to talk about the evil in society. It's your job to provide solutions. Let's all be allowed to do what pushes us, what motivates us. There are writers who can do that. Let them do it.
Peter,
thank you.
Thank you. Peter, let me bring you back. Are you there? Peter?
Yeah, I'm there.
So,
I'm there, Professor.
Can you respond to some of these issues? And I want to add one. Should we prescribe for younger people how they should live their lives? Should we say, why are you interested in Arsenal and Liverpool instead of reading a book? Why are you listening to this kind of music instead of reading Akwasi Audu poems? He just joined, that's why I'm using him, the distinguished Ghanaian poet. Can we really prescribe to younger people how they should live their lives and what should be of interest to them?
Thank you, Professor. I will answer this in two segments. The first one should be rethinking. Then I'll come to that one. Rethinking of the content we write, the quality, availability, affordability. Some people were asked about award. Well, we should rethinking of awardability. We should think of marketability. If we rethink on those lines, of course, with a sustainability, then we are in a place now to not to prescribe, but to attract. I've written one of the books called, I tried to translate it into English direct because I wrote it in Swahili. It's how a parent should make his or her child like learning. Hello?
I'm listening.
Yes.
I'm listening.
So that book is a material that tells you as a parent, how will you make your son or your daughter love reading more than anything? It's a techniques. It's not about being a dictator. It doesn't work that way. Because if you are a dictator, when he or she reach at the age of 18, here in Tanzania, 18, you are free. You are considered as an adult. You can decide on your own. He will just leave you with your principles and everything and get out to universities with her own or his own principles, his own choices. But if you attract your son or your daughter, he will also take it and attract his kids too. So one side I said, we should rethink on all those qualities, content, availability, affordability, on those kind of things that makes our literature alive. Whether it is on social media, soft copies or whatsoever, or it's a paperback, all the tools that, why should your son or your daughter say, Daddy, let's us watch a book or read a book instead of that one? It's about attracting. We cannot be a dictator in this world. The world has changed. Please allow me to speak it in Kiswahili.
Please go ahead.
To summarize. Katika dunia ya sasa, ni jukumu la kwetu sisi wazazi kuwahamasisha na kuwatamanisha watoto wetu mtoto anamwamini sana 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 mzazi wake, lakini sisi wazazi ndio sasa tunawaangusha watoto wetu, hawatuwapeleki katika ile njia ambayo iko sahihi. Kwa mfano, umerudi na kitabu nyumbani, usimtupie tu mtoto pop, haisaidii. Kwanza kipambe kile kitabu mapema kabla hujaleta. Leo nakuletea zawadi nzuri sana. Na zawadi gani baba? Subiri uone. Anakuwa na hamu na shauku. Na mengine mengi nimeandika katika kitabu changu kuonyesha hayo. Kwa hiyo tukiweza kufanya hayo mambo, utakuta kwamba watoto wanabeba kitabu na usomaji kama sehemu ya maisha yao, na watapewa kwa wajukuu zako. Well, just to summarize that, I was telling that if you are talking about literature, a book per se, do not carry it as you have been forced to. Carry it with passion, with love to your children. That today I'll bring you the most beautiful gift. Definitely they'll ask, what is that, daddy, or what that mommy? Say, hold on. Just eat, wash your hands, stay tuned, I'm coming. When you just reach at home, they'll grab you. Where is that? Say, wow, it's a book. That's how to enrich the kids or children, to attract children. So we should not just prescribe, but to make them get into the feeling of literature. That is what I think.
Let me ask you,
please.
Will it be possible I go to Nairobi and all these places in large where nightclubs are so fully packed? I mean, Nairobi nights are terrific. Will it not be possible to integrate literature into those nightclubs? I'm in Lagos conducting this interview, and we have Terracotta. I go there a lot. There's Ogubiri. That's where I go there to listen to poems, because what is done is to combine poetry reading with drinking.
Well,
and
Professor,
one other example, Freedom Park in Lagos. Music night, poetry night, reading nights. And they're very well attended. Is that a model we should probably consider, in which we say, okay, to bring younger people, they want to listen to this music, we are not discouraging you. Or why don't you listen to a poem along with it?
Yes, Professor, I have some very good example, and I'll try to see if I can get some video of that. I'm telling you, poems has made a great entertaining. Sometimes I can see more than music. There had several events here in Tanzania where they invited musicians, very famous, and they performed. Afterwards, just like, something of little value, they just give a chance to poem performance. Professor, I can assure you, the whole crowd was, wow, this is what we really wanted. So it's just a matter of how we can present our literature. If we have one musician called Poto, Rishon Poto. I can send you even the link of his video. Right. But he's so loved and so welcomed and invited each and every place. So it's not about the music. It's not about the book. It's how you present it. That makes a lot of sense. We also have audio of our stories. For example, Mtalimbo Books, that's my company, has started it. And it's so loved. Kids, they listen, they re-listen it. At the end, they start it again because it's something very nice. That is how we should do. So there's no competition between musicians and other authors, but there is ushirikiano. There is a collaboration. We can arrange a concert where people perform the novel and others will sing the music, because all these music and other things are coming from our work.
Dr. Wale Okedino, can you add to that? Can we do a combination? Do what young men and women want to do and then cleverly insert literature into it. Or when people do their naming ceremonies and burial ceremonies and they have gift bags, can we start a small idea that put a book in that gift bag? Yes, I'm asking you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Prof. Yes, we know that in Africa, many ceremonies actually are moving around poetry. For example, when you go to burial ceremonies, you hear the local musician chanting the praises of the deceased. People like, big poets like Professor Oniyo has kept this tradition in many of his poems. I'm sure whenever you hear him reciting his poetry, he usually starts with a music or goes in between the poetry recitation and some musical intonation with his Yoruba background. So for me, I believe that this transition or this merging of literature and performance is an entrenched African thing. Even nowadays, despite all this, our modernity and co, you go for a naming ceremony or a wedding ceremony, you see a local crowd who is called upon to recite the genealogy of the parents of the celebrants, and bringing it into the modern scene. We will have many of our young ones now who are experts in performance poetry, and you see them. There are competitions all over the place for performance poetry. Chukwumereje in Nigeria is a great fellow. Here in Ghana, there are so many young ones that we even invite to events to start. Oswald Okaite is one of them. We even took him to Nigeria to start off our conference with a performance poetry. So for me, this aspect of literature is still alive. The only thing is to make it more authentic and viable, just like you're suggesting. Can we be giving people gifts of books instead of giving them hampers of wine and rice? And even people said gallons of petrol is also being given out at wedding ceremonies. I mean, so we have to make that transition of bringing in books as gifts. But for the oral literature aspect of it, it's entrenched in our culture, and we just need to embellish it. And for me, one of my happiest moments in any literary event is when we have this, what you call cultural break or cultural interlude. And after all the big grammars, all the Turenshi and all the big discussion, you give us just 20 minutes for a dance performance to come in, and you will see the atmosphere changing. The fellow will come in to either depict a cultural, a political issue in a cultural way, with a poetry recitation or a dance drama. And these things are very good, and I think it should be encouraged. The only thing I will need to do is how to make it attractive to our young ones. Just like Peter is saying, packaging. How do we present this thing to them and make it, because people are already using technology to do this. People now have poetry recitations, audio books. We have audio books with poetry recitations. We have digital poetry books and all kind of things. One will say they may be expensive, they cost money, and this is why we need foundations, we need scholarships organizations, we need a lot of support to push this into the hearts and minds of our young ones.
So, Monica, what do you worry about with respect to the future of African literature? What are your worries?
My worry, my biggest one, is the loss of relevance of the African writer. Because I feel as long as we resist where our audiences are at and where they are going, we will continue to become more obsolete with each day. And there will come a point where we lose what little voice we already have. Earlier, someone pointed out the issue of other people speaking for Africa rather than Africa speaking for itself. So my main issue is, how do we get into that mainstream? And I think our attitudes is the biggest problem. Like when you look at the digital world and literature as being in conflict, instead of looking at the digital world as an enabler for literature to grow bigger. For example, Dr. Wale spoke about preserving our storytelling aspect of the African storyteller. For me, there's no conflict with digital there, because we are saying the traditional African storyteller told their story to a limited audience. Maybe it was an extended family or a clan setting by the fireside at night, or in a few cases, public events, but there were limited numbers. But we're saying in the digital world, the reach is wide. You don't even have physical borders. You can reach anyone. And we look at the tools. Someone already spoke about audiobooks. We have podcasts, because we are saying people are not reading because they're too busy. But if they have podcasts that they can download and listen to while they're doing something else, doing their laundry during the weekends, it means we are widening our reach, and we can get to almost anyone. We have graphics where you now have physical storybooks. Instead of someone reading the actual text, they can be following the picture, the moving cartoons or whatever, and you just have subtitles. And some of these things, it's only because we don't want to get out of the box. You asked about putting books in hotels, and I was cut off on that one. Yes, we need the physical books, and the biggest cost in Africa is printing. But if we make synergies with other people who need to get to the same audiences, why can't we have adverts on the back of our books and they cater for the printing costs? And why not even go further? When you go onto an aeroplane, you find music, you find movies and audios. So why can't we put our African books there on the planes that come to Africa? We put the African literature there. And we go even a step further at the hotels, at the airports, and other public access places. Don't worry about the physical book. Yes, we are putting it there, but we know it has limited reach. What about just a scan code that will open into all the literature of that country you are in? And just your gadget up there, and all the books and other stuff of that country is immediately available to you on your gadgets. So my biggest worry, Prof, is that we are not doing enough. We are not moving fast enough, and we still look at the digital space as an enemy rather than something that can empower us. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, you want to add to that? What do you worry about? What do you worry about?
In fact, she is just add to what I've been saying, is called availability, and of course marketability. So I concur with her. She's very right. We can use that, no problem. That is okay. But remember, there are those people who there are areas that we can access network. That is bravo. And for those areas that we cannot access, let's make this paperback, the books, physical books available.
Kano, can we join you in pressuring the Gambian government to have an endowment to support writers when they're young and when they're in retirement?
Yes, I guess this is a very good strategy that we should encourage, not only probably in the Gambia, but everywhere in Africa. Let me just say this. There was a time when pressure was put on the government, particularly the Ministry of Education at the time, that most of our youths can easily, without doubt, recite Baba Black Say Mary Had a Little Lamb, or even get exposed to all the Ladybird books, Beauty and the Beast, the Sleeping Beauty, the Princess and the Frog. These are books that were so abundant, in our small school libraries. But where were the Gambian books? Where were the African books? None of them were available. Even when I was in high school, you could read all the Mills and Boons, you could read all the Ian Flemings, you could read all the Thomas Hardy series, you could read all the, there are a plethora of books you can find in our libraries, but you could not find enough books. I was happy though that I was privileged to read some of the Pacesetter books. A lot of Nigerian writers came through those Pacesetter books that we had, which Macmillan introduced. We had Mohammed Sule's Undesirable Element, Kalu Okpik's books, etc. But what I'm driving at, as you've rightly said, is yes, we should be able to convince governments that we can have our works also given privilege in our schools, not only as supplementary reading for our education system, but also as main literature books, so that the younger boys and girls would, at every term, discover one African book. We have several African books that we discovered when we were in high school. The Mariam Abbas, So Long a Letter, Aminata Sofar's The Beggar's Strike. I wouldn't mention even Usman Semben. He has so many of his books around. But we have excellent writers who, unfortunately, this part of Africa will not discover, this part of the continent would not see, certainly because they have not been given the privilege they deserve, especially when we already have the West African Examination Council that has a way of promoting or advancing African literature in most of these countries. So yes, I agree with you. I would really go into pressurizing our governments, encouraging them to start with, but also putting a little bit of pressure to make them understand that having our African writers inside the curricula, having our African writers in the libraries, having it accessible so easily to the population is an indispensable element in not only promoting the works, but also exposing people in some of the, to some of the excellent works that are written by our counterparts in Africa.
Ashraf, can online rescue us? Can it be a solution?
Actually, yes, it is. Nowadays, it is a real solution, because everyone has his own or her own tool for accessing the internet, and the literary community has begun to pay attention to the importance of communication and presence through the many applications available in this space. In light of the epidemic, that crisis that swept the world during the past 3 years, many of our activities moved from ground to the alternative space. That is why I see the importance of producing literary programs, festivals, interviews, as well as creating a kind of African archive of literary products on all of its languages. Building a stock of live events and encouraging the addition of documentary available for African users and researchers around the world. This would be useful for the current and the future generation in addressing and dialogue with the heritage and interacting in favor of the dynamism of African literature. بعد أن أصبح لكل شخص أداة للوصول إلى الإنترنت، وبدأ المجتمع الأدبي ينتبه لأهمية التواصل، وفي ظل الأزمة التي اجتاحت العالم خلال 3 سنوات من الوباء، أرى أهمية إنتاج برامج أدبية ومهرجانات وحوارات، وكذلك خلق نوع من الأرشيف الأفريقي للمنتج الأدبي بكافة لغاته، وبناء رصيد من الفعاليات الحية وتشجيع إضافة مخزون تسجيلي متاح للمستخدمين الأفارقة والباحثين حول العالم. Actually, I wanted to comment also on the availability of literature for the audience, for the common readers. And that's why I recommended to go for anthologies, because it suits the modern life a lot. And I give example of this anthology I collected in Ibadan. Actually, in one collection of short stories, I could travel to many destinations. One story gives me the background of its writer, medical background, and in the same time, he's bringing rituals and traditions of the country. Another is talking about not utopia, not dystopia, but miltopia, something of science fiction coming from Africa. This is something new, and it is good for readers to know about it. And one more about the thieves, even the daily thieves. They are not only in one city in Africa, they are giving the types that are neighbors here in my home city. It means the anthology is an art that we need to develop and encourage to spread the literature for common readers. And I gave examples of one African poet and playwright and writers, Dr. Christopher Okrimwa. He has created a lot of anthologies like this huge one for more 1,200 pages on the justice, calling the world poets to talk about the dream of justice he needed. In the beginning, I mentioned the anthologies I created. This one was about ancient Egyptians, the modern poets. This about Jacques Hirschman, which is dedicated to the late poet. This was for Mediterranean waves, for anthology of poets around the Mediterranean. And the first one was Asia Thing. And from your platform, I announced that my next anthology for the Silk Road Literature series will be for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now at the moment when we can invite members of the audience to pose questions, to make comments. If you raise your hand, I will call upon you. While waiting for and some people have sent them questions. Gretchen Bauer, please go ahead with your question. Gretchen?
Yes, I'm trying to turn on my video. Okay, so thank you very much. This has really been very enjoyable. And I just want to say I'm a political scientist, but I teach a class called African Politics and Literature to undergraduates in the US. And we read 5 or 6 African novels in order to learn about African politics and history. And it's really my favorite class, and the students also love it. And I'd be happy to share, which are the authors that we read. But I'd also like to say that, we read many wonderful, wonderful African women writers. And, there's an absolutely burgeoning literature, right, by African women writers. But my question is about Afrofuturism. So I didn't hear anybody say anything about that. And in the last rendition of the class, we read Nnedi Okorafor's Binti, right, which is the beginning of a trilogy series. So that's one question. And then the other one is about autobiography, memoir, and biography. And of course, that's not fiction, that's nonfiction, but I feel like that is, also a rich resource and maybe not as highly developed across the African continent as in other parts of the world. So thank you very much.
Please write down the questions so that we can accumulate them. What is your thought on Afropolitanism? Mama Ebon Clark, please, Ebon Clark.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. I can hear you, ma'am.
I'd like to first of all thank PAWA for the attention it paid my husband during his lifetime. Celebrated his 50 years of literary output. He probably would have done in the 60th year, but he died in the 60th year. I just want to thank you for that. Dr. Okechukwu, you may be a doctor. There are so many famous writers who doctors. Keats is one of them. And we know that we all learn about Keats through English literature. And Jonathan Miller, the theater producer who changed the whole of British theater and even European theater, structured it for decades before returning to medicine. He too was a doctor. So don't worry about being a doctor. And I don't think any of your clients will sue you. So you just be happy what you have written about them. So thank you too for your wealth of work. Now I'm going to say this in all seriousness, and I would like all of us really the power to consider this. Is there such a thing as African literature? I believe we have African music, African visual art. So I'm talking really about the art forms that are non-verbal. When we now come to the verbal art form, literature, I do wonder if we have such a thing as African literature, commonality that will define African literature with all its genres of poetry, fiction, drama, because a lot of what I've heard today has concentrated more fiction if we talk about it. Sometimes you go to poetry, sometimes it's very rare into drama. Is it a term that is given us from outside in order to make appreciation and examination and discussion easier? Because in European literature, you do have a commonality of civilization. They say that their culture derives from Greece to Rome, we learned that at school, to the church, then to the monarchy, who are interrelated, or were, and still are, in European culture, from West Europe to Eastern Europe. So they have that commonality. And their culture now went outside to America, to New Zealand, to Australia, to South Africa, and so forth. Do we really have African literature? If we do, it's so highly complex, because of the various languages. Today, I've listened to French, I've listened to Arabic, I've listened to English, I've listened to Swahili in your discussion. It is part of its weakness and also part of its strength. Thank you so much. You can continue. I'd like you to think of maybe a conference on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Palumi Folajimi, Louisiana State University. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, the moderator and the speakers. I listened to Monica Cheru, who made some profound statements about the non-availability of some pieces of Nigerian literature. Even in the aircraft, you come across African movies, African music, but you hardly come across African, some pieces of African literature. I found that contribution quite remarkable. And then I began to wonder, what about the even available ones, which are being largely ignored? Dr. Okediro, I learned today that he has produced about 14 novels. The only one I know, which is probably his most widely studied text, is Tenants of the House. A lot of people are not reading new writers. Everybody is reading and engaging Oshundare, Oshofi Sonshoyinka, even J.P. Clark. Edmund Clark spoke a few minutes ago. Even J.P. Clark who was one of the most canonical, poets and dramatists that Africa has ever produced. These days it's not being studied again. People are studying Oshofi Sonshoyinka, Achebe. New writers are not being studied. Even some of the old ones are now being ignored, not being studied again. And I'm putting my question to to Dr. Okediran. Doctor, what do you have to say about new writers, many of them who are brilliant, producing fantastic works, but not being studied, being largely ignored? Even Amata Aido, one of the most widely studied, or female writers in Africa, there was a time that she complained, bitterly that female writers are not being studied, they are not being engaged. So this idea of studying the canon and ignoring the new ones, or ignoring the not widely studied ones, the idea of visibility, not being widely studied, being widely ignored. What do you have to say about this, please, Dr. Okediran? Thank you.
Thank you. Taiwo Oloruntoba Oju. Taiwo Oloruntoba Oju. Please, you have to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, please. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, I've done so now. Apologies. Thank you very much, sir. And it was really, really pleasurable and educating listening to the various speakers. I'm going to start with Dr. Okediran, and well, it's nice to see him after such a long time. I think it's been such a long time that we saw. Really, is there nothing that, actually, let me phrase it this way. Is the course of indigenous languages lost? Are there no ways of actually promoting them? Professor Falola asked a question like that. Are there things that organizations can do to promote these languages more? Incidentally, a number of organizations that I'm aware of outside of Africa promoting indigenous African languages. There is, for example, the Edinburgh Circle for the Promotion of African Languages and so on. But we do not seem to have equivalent enthusiasm in Africa itself. And I was wondering, take, for example, indigenous languages. By the way, I enjoyed the fact that some speakers spoke their languages. I was hoping to hear some Yoruba from Professor Dr. Okediran. I didn't hear it. Anyway, what's PAWA doing, for example, or the Association of Nigerian Authors for that matter, to promote literature in indigenous languages? Is there the possibility of some affirmative action, setting aside some prize, some Anna Prize or some PAWA Prize for indigenous literature and so on? I ask because, as a matter of fact, it's really very painful, when you see that our literatures are, our indigenous African literatures are lost. And I think Mama Clark, I think also when she was asking whether we had African literature, although she didn't mention indigenous African languages, I thought perhaps she was going in that direction as well. So it's a question that I would like to ask. If there is time later, I would ask other questions. Thank you, sir.
Segun Olude from Canada. Segun Olude.
Good afternoon, everyone from here. I'm glad to be here again, even though I was late. I got enough from what Dr. Barry contributed towards the end of his presentation. And I also want to latch onto the question that Mama Ebon Clark asked. I'm a graphic designer by profession, and I also teach graphic design at the university. And I keep telling the story of how I was over 50 before I realized the importance of the Yoruba language, the language which I should own and was born with. Why? Because we were all being brought up to be very westernized in that context in Lagos. So my contributive question is, should we look for where the bleed is and make sure we don't bleed anymore so that we can then start to treat the problem? Number one, I had no idea about the breadth of African literature even as a child, and they were there, but we were more exposed to Western literature of all sorts. Fast forward to today, we switch on Netflix, we want to watch African movies. I keep questioning, are these African movies or movies by Africans? And that's where I latch on to the question Mama Ebon Clark had, because some of them are just Western stories dressed up in African clothing, so to speak. And the more we do this, the more we perpetuate the same old ideologies. And I can't name them here because it would take too much time, but fast forward again to the situation in Canada. The government of Canada has policies, and policies bring up regulations. One of them is, if you say you're going to get a tax break from Canada to produce a movie or present a magazine or any form of literature, what is the Canadian content in it? That is a question not just for the Ugandan government, but for all governments around Africa, and probably most of the indigenous world. Canada will give money for indigenous productions that show the language, that use the language, the clothing and the costumes, to use a word that I hardly want to use. It's not a costume, it's their way of life. How are we going to stop the bleeding by limiting the exposure to the kinds of things that we see and repeat in our presentation, whether it's literature, whether it's visual? How can we stop the bleeding? That is going to be my main question, and I'll stop there. Thank you so much for your patience.
Diomede Mujojoma, you have to forgive me if I do not pronounce your name very well. Mujojoma.
Thank you so much. It's the right pronunciation. I am Diomede Mujojoma. I'm speaking from Bujumbura, Burundi. I'm a writer, a novelist, and I'm very pleased to attend to this meeting, this important meeting. And I thank so much Dr. Wall, who invited me. I've been listening to all the presentation. I can clap for you all who did the presentation. And my question is this: what can be done to promote African literature, especially the new generation of the writers? Mr. Peluni points it is greater to promote the new generation of writers, but also as Taiwo speaks it, points it out about indigenous languages. It is also important to promote those indigenous languages. You remember in Central African Writers Organizations, it's a platform on internet, on WhatsApp. We are planning to produce an anthology of stories in our indigenous languages, and we hope that it will be a good production. that will be put to you all, and will be announcing you maybe when the anthology will be releasing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and greetings to all our friends in Burundi. Professor Neo Shundari. Professor Shundari.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you very much, Tony, for, as usual, bringing the family together. And Wale, the power man, thank you for trying to make us powerful as we should be. It's been a very interesting afternoon indeed. Just one or two basic things to say. I'm asking myself, how did it happen that when I was in high school in the western part of Nigeria in the 1960s, books by Chinua Achebe came to me, books by James Ngugi, that was his name then, before he became Ngugi wa Thiong'o, came to us and we read. Amata Ido was also there. Then a writer that we thought was a Sierra Leonean, but turned out that he was a Gambian, Larry Peters. I didn't only read his poetry, I also read his fiction, The Second Round. Tale of the Cockroach, or Fate of the Cockroach, all the way from Egypt, also came to us. How did this happen? There were writers then, there are still writers now. How come what we are writing now are not really going across Africa, are not going beyond Africa? At this time, one publishing house that made all the difference was called Heinemann, the African Writers Series. The moment the African Writers Series was dismantled, about almost 25 years ago now, the international visibility of African literature began to decline. Writing is painful. It's a matter of conviction, of passion, and a willingness to take some kind of punishment on yourself, as it were. But equally important is publishing. Equally important is distribution. Our books are not being distributed. I still remember the way PAWA came to be, 1988, after the Shoyinka conference in Lagos. Atukwe Okai's idea it was. That was what led to the grand meeting in Accra the following year, 1989. One of the first things we harped upon was Pan-African, trans-African kind of atmosphere and opportunity for African works. Let us be able to read one another and then get the word to also read what we were producing. And I remember one of the most important things was, there must be a translation bureau. And that, I think it was the OAU then, before it became African Union, that this should actually be taken to the OAU. They should fund it. Translate works by different African writers into different African languages, so that I'll be able to read Ngugi wa Thiong'o in Yoruba in Nigeria, and they'll be able to read our works from Nigeria, in Kenya or Tanzania or whatever. So these problems are there. These are the basic problems we have not been talking about. Very, very quickly. I think it was Dr. Nkrumah, bless his soul, who said, ask ye for the political kingdom, and all other things shall be added unto thee. I don't really hear anybody talking about the bad leadership we've been having in Nigeria. The fact that the situation in Africa now is worse than it was 50 years ago, 30 years ago. Our graphs are going down in virtually all the countries. Our currencies have collapsed. Is anybody talking about this? Writing doesn't happen in an economic and social and political vacuum. No. When you write the books now, the people are too poor to even buy. You who are a writer are probably too hungry to write. This is where the point made by my sister, Monica, comes in. Incidentally, I've just done a fairly long poem, satirical poem. The title is "We Are the Happiest People in the World." It is ironical. Happiness, yes. I hope you know happiness is both in you, it's also transitive. We must not paint the wrong picture of Africa, negative picture of Africa all the time. But unfortunately, most of the lives we are most of us are living in Africa are terrible. Are you going to, if you are hungry, how can you really write project yourself to the world that you are happy? You come from a happy country. African countries are not happy countries. They are not. And our rulers have sold us down, and we, the followers, have been indolent enough to follow. Art is not just a matter of expressing yourself. It is transgressive. It is disruptive. And we have examples in the first, second generations of African writers, how this could be done. And finally, the point made by Professor Falola about the saga of, links up very well with what happened to the Norma Award. The Norma Award was by a Japanese publisher, Kodansha, for the recognition of African works. It was a foreigner that came to us to give us that. The first winner was Mariam Maba, So Long a Letter. That beamed her to the world, no doubt about it. A couple of years ago, when the Japanese said, now African publishing has settled enough, we are going. They have done a lot. The organizers went from one African country to another. No African government, no African leader would accept to take it over. So the thing has gone into abeyance. This is the context in which we operate. It is not, things are not happy for us. And finally, who do we write for? What kind of thing do we write? Who do we expect to lead us? Literature, in fact, art generally, has always moved along two dimensions, two streams. There is popular art. There is another kind of art that is not so popular. I'm reading a book, one of the essays by Toni Morrison. She's asking, what if Shakespeare had been a bestseller? There are great works that are basically, they cannot be bestsellers. We have to accept that. The Pacesetter series that my brother mentioned, yes, that is the popular side. It was in every hand. People were complaining in Nigeria that, oh, they were debasing literature and so on. We had to say, no, maybe we need this kind of literature actually to pave the way for the more serious ones. They don't contradict each other. The so-called serious belletristic art and literature and the popular one, the two of them can coexist. So thank you very much for this. I hope, we hope we're going to be having more and more and more of this so as to empower power.
Thank you, sir. Two more, and then they will respond. Damola Adeyefa. Damola.
Thank you. Thank you for the privilege, Prof. Well, I just want to talk on the translation aspects of the presentation today, where you are trying to ask about the technological contribution to translation, and most especially to our Francophone brothers. Well, I think if there is a time that translation needs technology and technology needs translation, it is now. And technology is very, very important to translation in our days. In fact, most of the translated text that I am reading as one who is coming up in translation from the European worlds, it has to do with, most of them, they are translated literally, and they take advantage of what we call machine translation. Today, I'm not talking about Google Translation now, but I'm talking about there are applications, there are institutions that are technological based in translations, and we should begin to see the necessity of this. Because if literature and literary works are going to be transposed and advanced into the other cultures of the world, translation is important. And most of what we say that we have to, when we talk about, we are saying that because of orality, technology may not be important to translation, and a lot of things that have to be translated, the technological devices may not be able to translate it. And I think it's more than that today. In the European works, most of the works that we are reading, some of them, they are being translated literally. They are being translated literally, and they are using all these technological devices. So, for instance, even what we are saying, if I take the example of en français, on the when Soyinka say "Ba Semi Soro" in Ogbojo Ninu Igbo Orumole, and he translates it as "have a rapid dialogue with my leg," which is an idiom coming from Yoruba, and it's simply telling us about one being desperately for one's to save one's life. En français, on peut traduire ça de prendre la fuite. Si je dis Ba Semi Soro est de prendre la fuite pour nos frères dans les pays francophones, Ba Semi Soro en Yoruba, qui signifie d'avoir un dialogue avec ses pieds. Ce n'est pas la même chose, mais avec la traduction de Ba Semi Soro, qui signifie le fait de chercher à prendre la fuite. Ça dépasse le fait de chercher à prendre la fuite, mais c'est une expression idiomatique que Soyinka traduit directement et littéralement en anglais. Au lieu d'essayer de prendre la fuite, il a dit Ba Semi Soro. Il a traduit ça en anglais, il a traduit l'idiome en anglais en disant d'avoir un dialogue avec ses pieds. Donc, en fait, avec les technologies en traduction, aujourd'hui, on peut même traduire certains textes. On peut traduire certains textes d'anglais vers le français, du français vers l'anglais, et après, on va avoir une révision seulement. Donc, on doit commencer par voir que dans nos jours aujourd'hui, la technologie est importante et on doit essayer d'aller avec le monde. Quand on parle avec globalisation, quand on parle avec la mondialisation plutôt, avec la mondialisation, il est nécessaire de voir comment est-ce qu'on peut transmettre la culture ou bien les cultures africains vers les autres pays anglophones, les lusophones, ainsi de suite. Bon, pour les frères dans les pays francophones qui sont traducteurs, il est le temps de commencer par chercher comment est-ce qu'on peut avoir des avantages par rapport des événements technologiques pour pouvoir traduire certaines choses avec l'aise en traduction. So in other words, I'm saying that we should begin to see the necessity of what technology can offer us in translation. I'm mere saying that technology cannot do more for us in translating African literature is like we are saying we are not going with globalization. So if we are going to have intercultural communication of our literary works, then we must know that translation technology and technological devices in translation, they're there to help us. But only what we need to know is to see that what are those available ones, not like Google Translation. In fact, for any professional translation, you will not be talking about Google Translation. There are other translations, internet and translation facility on the internet that we can just register, even with our researches. With our researches, competent and classical researches in English to be translated by a researcher into French without necessarily looking for a translator. And I think we should begin to see this. Thank you so much for the privilege, Prof.
Thank you. Thank you. The very last but not the least, Emeka Nwadiora.
Thank you, Professor Falola, for giving me this opportunity. I guess my question has to do with the future of African literature. Obi Wale, several decades ago, talked about the end of our civilization if we do not write in our own languages. And I want to echo the word of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who I went to conferences with, but also echo Professor Taiwo and Professor Olude talking about our languages are in peril. Actually, there is this theory that in the next 100 years, Yoruba language will almost be gone. Igbo language, which I belong to, will be a forgotten thing. What is the future of African language when we continue to write in English, in French, in other languages? Those colonial languages continue to hunt us and will continue to hunt us continuously if we do not begin to make some steps into writing in our own language. And they can be translated into other languages, but our language is so critical and we need to begin to write in our own languages because language is power, language is culture, language is essence, who you are. You are Professor Toyin Falola because you're first and foremost a Yoruba person. And then you're a human being. What I'm trying to say here, and everybody understands this, is if we cannot write in our own language, then we're in serious, very serious trouble.
Thank you. Well, Ashraf, please respond. You don't have to respond to everything.
I will begin from back to front regarding every all related questions. Actually, I agree with what was said about the colonial languages. Actually, this is correct, but alternatives will be different foreign languages to each other. I mean, I cannot say that Arabic will be the language of Africa. This will not be accepted by Swahili writers or Hausa writers or Yoruba writers and so on. So a foreign language is a foreign language, whether it is an African or European or Arab, it is a foreign language. So when I talked about this, I asked, why do we use the language? This is the importance of using the language. Actually, if we as I said, if we want the language to be the language of our entertaining, of our education, of enlightenment, communication, these are our native languages. So it is basically a use of native language for these things. But if we are addressing others, we will use the language of others. And there was one comment about the lost languages. Actually, from time to time, we have lost languages. 1,000 years ago, Persian, Arabic were the most influential languages available on the globe. And maybe in 100 years later, new languages will avail and other language will cease to act. I will congratulate my colleague from Burundi for the new anthology, and this is something we wait for, anthologies, because anthologies will help more readers to go for this seeking African literature. It is useful and it will be available, I hope, not only in print, but in digital so that it can spread more. But in all cases, this will need a sponsor to make them available for more readers. Last thing I want to comment, actually, it's about the speaker on African writer series. Because of a publisher, he could find Mr. Oluwenji or Sandari. He spoke about finding a writer from away in his own country, and the same is happening for him to go beyond. This is the the meaning of having a good publisher with a mission. And this is what we lack in Africa. It is only few names that can do this job, and they need a sponsorship. And I think that one good mission to turn PAWA from association to movement is to find good publishers who are willing to help to promote African literature. Thank you.
Peter, please respond. You do not have to respond to all the questions.
Thank you, Professor. All the questions were very nice, actually very constructive. I will go to one of the future of our literature, Africa, as regard to our languages. Yeah, this is kind of a very critical issue, because now we are not seeing Africa, we are seeing Afro-Europe, we are seeing Afro-American, that is very popular. We see Afro-Hindu, Afro-Chinese, because we are now mixing up. The Chinese are coming here, the Hindu are here, the Americans are here, and everybody's here. So it's a kind of very critical issue to address. Well, that goes back to our African societies. That is, in order to preserve our African literature, that should begin from our children. If your children is powered enough, he or she can mix up with the Chinese, and they can make Afro-Chinese literature. But if our children are not enriched enough, that means they'll be swallowed by other literature. Then at the end of the day, we'll not have African languages, we'll not have African literature, we'll have nothing from Africa. And that's where the globe is. So to respond to that, what's the future of African literature and African mother languages, is we as an adults, we have to make sure that we attract and inherit our children with our traditional customs, ethics, and everything that builds up our literature. Then from there, they can actually go and mix with everybody, and still they will be African as a nation, as a literature, as a whatsoever it is. Well, we have to, talking about these mother languages, I have to cite from my home country, that is Tanzania. We have almost 120 plus tribes, and each tribe comes up with a language or a dialect. Now you can see it's a serious issue, but we are united with Kiswahili. So we have Kiswahili as a language that unites us as Tanzania, and it goes as far as to Uganda, Kenya, Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, little. So at least we can say that we have a way of preserving those tribes' language, and still we have one big language. What I'm trying to address here is not a crime for you to master 2 or 3 languages. I'd be so happy that I can speak a little English, and I can talk and write Kiswahili very much, and I can also try to read or to understand Yoruba, Hausa, Zulu. It's an added advantage. If you're going to secondary and you are studying 10 subjects, why don't you study or learn 4 languages? It's just a notion. I think that should be our priority, that we know English, we know Arabic, we know French, we know Portuguese, those languages, but still we have to keep our mother languages. And it's this time now we have to go across Africa. We should be proud to learn Kiswahili. We should be proud to learn Yoruba, Hausa, Zulu. It's not a crime, but it's something very important. So that's the future of African literature and African mother languages.
Thank you very much. Monica Cheru, please. Questions of interest to you?
Okay, thank you. The first one I'm going to address is the issue of African writers and what's available and how the biography situation in Africa is maybe not as well developed as in other places. My question to that speaker, that's the introspect. What is their procurement process? And what are the procurement channels for the African books that they study? How do they get to choose these 5 or 6 that they do in a year? Are they sure that they know all the African writers that are currently active on the continents and releasing books every day? Where I'm coming from is I hear in a lot of places that Wilbur Smith is the definitive writer for Zimbabwe. I am a Zimbabwean born, and I've never lived in any other country. And I certainly don't relate to the Zimbabwe that Wilbur Smith relates in his books. So if someone is looking at the channel of Wilbur Smith as a Zimbabwean writer and sticking to that and not exploring what else the country is offering, their view is going to be very skewed. So like I said, that's introspection. What is your view of Africa and how are you accessing African literature? The second thing I'm going to address is the languages, our indigenous languages and how we need to protect them. Yes, it's good for us to look at our traditions, our culture. There are things like the UNESCO funding for preserving intangible cultural heritage. And maybe PAWA should look at that to see which countries are signatories and how do we as writers move in to access those funds. Because in a lot of countries, those funds are lying idle and being returned each year. So this could be a source of revenue that could empower us without relying on foreign funding per se. Because UNESCO is part of UNDP, so we would consider that part of our government funding. But with our local languages, we also have to realize that language development comes from how practical its use is. In spite of all the best intentions and everything, the Latin language died. But it was a language that was supported by a moneyed class. It was not that they didn't have the resources, but because it was not practical, it just went out. So maybe we need to consider our colonial heritage as part of us, as what defines us today. And do we necessarily fail to communicate our Africanness in French, in English, in Arabic, or any of the other foreign languages? And right now, as we are sitting here, other languages are moving in. The Chinese have got the, what do you call these centers that they have teaching Chinese languages in Africa, and they're growing. So on a practical level, how much can we preserve? And how much effort should we put towards that? Like today we are here, we are discussing African literature, but mostly we are doing it in the foreign languages. Why? Because that's the only way to practically communicate on a wide scale. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the issue of literature having levels, bestsellers, and what have you. Is that not a perception? Because Shakespeare, if you look at the historical facts of when he was in production, he was actually a bestseller. He was the equivalent of a bestseller in his time. So He created content for his audience. You look at the cultural setting, this was a highly religious audience that didn't have a lot of entertainment. And he was also writing to please the powers that be at that time. So if you look at it, all the aspects of a bestseller are there, but it was bestsellers of his time. So this is what we are now defining as serious literature. But does it suit our time? If we fail to change with the times, are we going anywhere? I will stop there and give others a chance to address other issues. Thank you.
Shano Umabari, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Probably now that most of the issues have been probably addressed without having to keep hitting a dead horse now, let me just focus on two issues. The first is about publication. I'm happy that one of our distinguished elders here did mention about reading books during his time in school, and then he cited the Iwole Soyinka, Chinua Achebe, and Len Repeaters, who happen to be a Gambian, but with some Sierra Leonean background somehow. It's true that if you look at the history of publication or publishing in Africa, the first, to really start publishing were the Mbadi. Mbadi was a collection of writers at the time that started helping to writers to publish. And then, you got the Heinemann, the Macmillan coming in. Macmillan came with Pacesetters, and Heinemann came in with the Africa Writers series. And then you also don't forget the French. They had Présence Africaine, that was created by Alun Job. And these became they were in fact created for a purpose at the time. If you realize that most of the writers at the time were rejected, African writers to be specific. But once they broke through, Heinemann came in and then created the African Writers series. So after these stopped, after they stopped, then there's a problem. It meant that Africa didn't take up from there. Présence Africaine, however, continued, with its own publication, because it was created by a Senegalese, Alun Job, who was based in France, but who continued to have his book, his publication company, in Senegal. So the Francophones were able to continue publishing, but the Anglophone started getting serious problems, because they don't have publishers around. I think this is a very important question he raised. Why has literature therefore been, strangled at some point because we couldn't get good publishers publishing? The second issue is about our national languages. And I'm sure we all know how Ngugi wa Thiong'o, James Ngugi, who came to be Ngugi wa Thiong'o, started revendicating about publishing in our own languages. He started writing in Kiswahili, most of his works. But what happened? Most of his works were also translated back to English. The point is, at the end, it's not, I think, for lack of wanting to write in our languages. It's also because our colonial setup never allowed our national languages really to kick off from the start, to prosper, to grow. Yeah, Nigeria is lucky today. You can read and write in Yoruba. You can read and write in Igbo. You can read and write in Hausa. It is not the same for Africa, everywhere in Africa. In the Gambia, for example, we still have a problem to read and write in Mandinka, in Pular, and in Wolof. The same thing applies to maybe in a few other countries. I know Senegal has done it, Mali has done it, but then what happened? They are more nationalistic than international. So what I'm saying is, we might probably need to continue promoting our national languages. In fact, it's highly recommended we continue to do it. We need to also promote the writing literature in our national languages. I know of some, a crop of literature written in Fulani, in Wolof, in Mandinka, around, and I'm sure some are also written in the Nigerian national languages. But at the same time, let us also understand that language is just a means of communicating. And I agree there with Monica. We communicate through language, but we also vehicle our cultures through language. So even if we speak English, let's bring in a little bit of Fulani in our English, a little bit of Yoruba into our English, so that it becomes our own vehicle of our own culture, and we domesticate it to adapt it to our own context, but use it because we know it is the means by which we can communicate to the rest of the world. So I'll stop there, and then thank you very much.
And then finally, the power man, Dr. Okedun.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Prof. I want to thank all the those who intervened through their contributions and questions. I want to thank Professor Clark. Thank you, Ma, for the little we were able to do to honor our late sage, and your reassurance that none of my patients will prosecute me for for using their inspiration to write my novels. I want to thank Welumi, Professor Taiwo Oju, my old friend who we've lost touch for some time. I want to thank Shegun Olude, Professor Niyo Shundare, and Damola Adefa and Emeka Nwajora. Thank you for your beautiful interventions. Some of the questions have been tackled, so I don't want to repeat myself, except to concentrate on 3 areas. And then also to thank, yes, I've mentioned his name, Damola Adefa, yes. I mean, it's a very reassuring statement that technology is around to help us with translation, because translation is one of our biggest headaches today. I mean, and there's no point beating about the bush, because for many reasons, the African Union designated some official languages as languages of translation and of communication. And those are the so-called colonial languages, Arabic, English, French, Swahili, Portuguese. And since I came on board as PAWA Secretary General, I've been under serious pressure by many writers on the need to expand all these languages. People are even saying, why should you, at this time of the day, be communicating in colonial languages? Why don't we use indigenous languages? But just like Peter mentioned, in Tanzania, just in Tanzania, he mentioned the number of languages available. And then I've also mentioned, I also made the addition to what we have in Nigeria, more than 500 so ethnic groups with their languages. And then the problem now comes, which of these languages we are going to pick? And that is why we have 2 schools of thought on this issue. The school of thought says, okay, let everybody write in his own language, and we just continue to translate, and then we communicate. The people say, no, that will be too unwieldy. Let's adopt a single language for the whole African continent. And I'm sure many people tried this before now, including the controversial Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, because I remember many years ago, I was on the PAWA delegation that visited Libya, and that was the time of Atiku Okai as Secretary General. When Gaddafi was promoting, I'm sure many of you remember that, when he was promoting the idea of a united African Republic, and wanted the capital to be in Libya anyway, and then the common lingua franca to be Arabic. And he tried that. Ngugi wa Thiong'o tried his own idea of going back to writing his native Kikuyi, and so many people have intervened. And it's like we are still in the same spot. For me, this is a work in progress, and I don't think I have all the answers. Professor Oshundare has also highlighted some very important points that we can use to guide us. And I'm happy he mentioned the issue of the Translation Bureau, which was supposed to be funded by the African Union. Because when I got into PAWA, and I saw the beautiful documents, very fantastic ideas that PAWA is supposed to prosecute, translation issues, writing in indigenous languages, distribution, formation of a PAWA publishing house, as well as issues of trans-African distribution of books. But I believe that as beautiful as these ideas are, the backing, the necessary backing, the necessary machinery for PAWA to handle all this are not there. And that's why I'm so happy that Professor Oshundare is trying to, and went back history to give us how PAWA evolved, and some of the expectations of the founding fathers. And it's as if we are still, we haven't made much progress. But what we are trying to do now is because the first challenge we have in PAWA now is poor funding. I'm happy most of my other colleagues are here who we added to this. The idea that we should be funded by each African government to be funding PAWA is beautiful. But as you know, the moment we ask African leaders to do something, nobody does anything. And so we have to go around cap in the hand to, but having said this, it's not all bad news. We've made substantial progress. We're able to organize a democratic meeting and election for the first time in 28 years, just a few weeks ago in Nigeria. We've been able to bring back some of our members who had lost interest in PAWA, who are now back, and some of my colleagues now on the panel. And we're all happy. We are putting us together to make sure that some of the dreams of the founding members, founding fathers of PAWA are brought to light. And we'll continue to go to our veterans. Professor Shundari, I can see Professor Sovison here, past PAWA president, for the necessary support when we need them, including financial, even though they will tell us that they don't have any money, but we'll still be calling on them. And to also to say that we already have a parole for translation, which we are working in association with the Egypt Writers Association in Cairo. We've just had our first meeting, and we are looking at the aspect of translation of African books and how to move them around across borders. And Damilola Adeyefa, I will be happy if you can drop your contact for me in the chat box so that we can talk more on this important information you've given us on technology. On the issue of bad leadership in Africa, it's a big problem. I know that as writers, we're not supposed to write alone. We're also expected to make comments, and if possible, to even be part of the governorship in Africa so that we can see whether we can make changes from within, not only from outside. Then coming back to some of the issues raised by Segun Olude regarding policies and regulations for countries before they can support literature, as is happening in Canada. This is something that has been pushed in Nigeria. I mean, at least I can speak for Nigeria, having been a former member of the parliament there. And we'll be able to push for recently, just about 2 weeks ago, the copyright law was reenacted in Nigeria to make it stronger and to take care of issues of piracy and other policies and regulations. And then there's a bill on support for the arts by government. That one too, I think, is making a very good progress in the parliament. And I think this is what we should encourage every African country to also push policies and regulations in individual countries to support and strengthen the book industry. Then the issue of promotion of indigenous language, to me, is a bit, we need to have division of labor if you want to make progress. And what we have done in PAWA is to ask all the national associations to handle issues of indigenous languages in their respective countries. For example, Association of Nigerian Authors in Nigeria, you should look into how those languages can be promoted through institution of prizes, seminars, that kind of thing, because it will be too much for PAWA to sit down here in Accra and try to coordinate all indigenous languages in Africa. When some countries we have up to 500 each. Yeah, I mean, so we are trying to encourage the local national associations look into issue of indigenous languages in your country, while we stay here and try to be like a supervisor. When you need us, we'll come in. Then the issue of publishing too. One of the documents we just passed to for our budget for next year is the inauguration of a publishing house for PAWA. We have done some publishing in the last few years. We're able to bring out 2 books, one on J.J. Rollins as well, a leader in Africa, and also one that is talking about literature in the colonial languages that we're doing. And then we are working on the proceedings of our recently concluded conference in Nigeria. That's a book of conference proceedings. We are going to put together all the decisions we took. And so we have started some publishing, but we now want to enlarge it to see whether we can help some of our members. And then we also believe that our writers can work and collaborate with the film industry. We know that Nollywood, Kannywood, and all these Woods film productions are doing very well, making a lot of money. But again, the script they are using, even though, like Monica said, at least they are escapists in form. They are able to. Can be improved upon if we writers can move into that sphere with our own well-produced books. Well, the other issues that are so that we can continue to talk, UNESCO, the role of UNESCO, how do we bring in the Afro-European and everything to, yes, PAWA. Currently, we have 6 regions. We divided the African continent into 5 regions: West, East, Central Africa, North. Then we have a 6th region, which we call the diaspora, and that is where we think we can collaborate or interface with writers from different backgrounds who are interested in African literature, whether they're from Europe or from, because somebody told me that a country like Colombia has a very sizable number of writers of African origin who are looking for a platform. So our 6th region, that is those in diaspora, will tackle that aspect. It's a lot of work, but we are not relenting, and we are always happy to collaborate with people, and we look forward to suggestions and support. And lastly, to thank Professor Tony Falola for bringing us on board, giving us this opportunity to interact or interface with our writers all over the African continent. I also want to thank my colleagues from Gambia, from Egypt, Monica from Zimbabwe, and Peter from Tanzania, as well as all those who join us online. Can see our gurus, mentors, Professor Sophison, Oshundare Clark, and so many other writers who came on board to spend the last few hours with us. Thank you very much, and we hope that this can be done again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all our technical support, all those who work for the tier of interviews who are here, and some of whom we cannot see because they are working behind the scene, and those who allow us to stream and to relay this to radio stations, their Facebooks and Twitter. We are very grateful. Without you as contributors, there will be no program. And I have enjoyed the last 3 hours talking about African literature. Thank you very much. And until we meet again, I wish you all the best. Good evening. Bye-bye.